What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, and we're back with a little bit of a different, which we'll explain now in a moment, episode 87 of our Quack experimental podcast. And first off, let's get this right out of the way. You may be wondering, why is this one a little bit different? Well, this one is a little bit different because I'm going to use just some random other footage I have left over here, some real life kind of stuff, simply because my regular webcam that I used to just film these with is on the fritz. So I've tried reinstalling the software, I've tried uninstalling, reinstalling the drivers, and it's just no matter what I use, if I use OBS, if I use regular capture, or if I use anything else, it just doesn't work. And sure, I could connect in the GoPro and use that as a webcam, but let's keep it a little bit different and keep it a little bit alternate, a little bit of a change, if you will. But anyway, in the meantime, let's go with our 87th episode of our Quack experimental podcast. Now, you might remember that as we're doing these right now, because of real life limitations and restrictions and whatnot, some of this stuff is a little bit older. It's not all within the last couple of days. You may have read some of this or seen some of this last week or whenever it was, but we've got a good bit of stuff to talk about. So, let's get started. First off is Tekken X Street Fighter, a game you probably never, ever thought you would hear me mention. Now, to be honest, I forgot this even existed. Now, you might remember that Tekken X Street Fighter and Street Fighter X Tekken were technically a thing in two different games. And this one, Tekken X Street Fighter, was being developed by Bandai Namco. Now, unfortunately, this one is a little bit weird because apparently in an interview recently was stated that it was cancelled after being on hold since 2016. So you might remember again a couple of years back, it's probably been about 10 at this point, but Capcom made their take on the whole thing and they made Street Fighter X Tekken. It's important to note the names are reversed, so it's their take on the crossover. Now, development for Tekken X Street Fighter apparently stopped around the 30% mark, despite some of the character models being finished and character models looking great. They went on to say that Chun-Li and a bunch of the female characters were exceptionally great-looking character models. Now, this was all a little bit, I don't want to say debunked, but we had other people coming out, other people involved, directors, producers, etc., from Bandai Namco, coming out and saying that this was a mistranslation, and that the game hasn't officially 100% been cancelled. It's just still on permanent zero progress pause from 2016. So technically, it hasn't been scrapped, at least if this is true. You know how companies are. If this is true, it hasn't been scrapped. They just haven't worked on it at all in any capacity in 5 years. And the game is stuck at about 30%. And honestly, given the fact that it was originally developed as a 360 PS3 and way back PC game, honestly, they did probably really need to just start over almost at this point. If they're going to release it on, let's just say PS5, modern PC, and Xbox Series S and Xbox Series MES, if they're going to launch it on just all of those platforms, they're going to need much higher stuff. Sure, they can use it as a baseline and whatnot, and maybe some of the mechanics and the code can be salvaged, but yeah, it's probably best to leave it dead. It really goes to show, when we were all growing up, there was always, what if Street Fighter fought Tekken? What if Tekken fought Street Fighter? What if Mortal Kombat fought Street Fighter? What if Marvel fought Capcom? This kind of stuff. And it seems like we have an answer for this one, and it's not a good one. But what could be a good one is a potential leak we have at the moment. Now, this one is about the Castlevania Advance Collection. Still no proper details on it, of course, because it hasn't been announced. It's just been leaked by the Australian ratings board. Now, because of the name of the game because of the name of the collection and what we have already in alternate collections and stuff, this one is likely going to be the Game Boy Advance games for Castlevania. So you've got Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, and Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. These are all apparently very good games. I haven't played them myself. At least I think I may have emulated one of them at one point for like 20 minutes because oh my god, it's a new Castlevania game. But it's been so long I couldn't tell you. But it is interesting to see that they are porting them over in ways like this, especially with the likes of how I won't say Castlevania is getting a resurgence because it's not up to that level. But between the Netflix anime and all the collections and whatnot, I mean, there's the Castlevania, is it Requiem collection on PS4, which includes Dracula X and Symphony of the Night. You've got the 8-game Castlevania collection on multi-platform. You've got the upcoming release of Rondo of Blood officially in English for the Turbo Duo from Limited Run Games for the first time ever. I mean, it's not that it's getting a complete resurgence, it's just it's no longer completely irrelevant, I guess. I mean, new Castlevania games, I'm pretty sure the newest Castlevania game was on the 360. They may, depending on how you classify it, there may have been that one on the, well, I was thinking the Devil May Cry hack and slash one, as opposed to the likes of, oh, what was that other one? I think it's like Castlevania HD or something like that. It's not the first game. It's like a multiplayer one on Xbox Live Arcade. It's probably on the PS3 as well, but you get the idea. Anyway, we'll have to wait and see. This has no official date yet. I've been meaning to go back and play some more of the Castlevania collection, but over the last little while, I've streamed some of the other ones. You know, Rondo of Blood and Super Castlevania 4. I finished both of them for the first time, so I guess it's probably only fitting and only fair that I go back and do some of the others. So moving on from something that is technically a good idea, like the Castlevania collection, we'll move on to something that's an absolutely awful, bad idea for consumers, because you'd have to be either a blind fanboy or a complete idiot to volunteer for this. So, what are we talking about next? Well, PlayStation and Sony are opening up PS5 firmware beta testing to regular users. So this one is basically, it's open to select fans, it's not completely open to everyone. And it's also only going to apply in the US, Canada, Japan, UK, Germany, and France. Now, the big problem with all of this is Sony's operating system on, let's say, the PS3, the PS4, especially the PS4, and, well, hell, even especially the PS5. And their programming and their feature set and how they've done all of this over all of these and how it's progressed and all has been absolutely awful. And with beta testing, you are risking potentially bricking your console. That's right, potentially bricking a PS5. Imagine that. Imagine how rare and hard to find that would be. It's an awful idea for any of this. I don't know why people just have... The mindset has swapped over in the last maybe 10 to 15 years. I mean, I guess it's because of people being weird and the internet being the internet nowadays and how everyone needs their instant gratification. But remember when companies used to pay people, proper qualified people and departments ridiculous amounts of money for proper quality assurance, proper QA. And now people will risk their own consoles to do it for free. It's madness. Now, of course, in some cases, because we've seen in the past with PS3s and PS4s, where if the firmware update does break the console, sometimes they will replace it, sometimes they will repair it, sometimes they won't. So it's and especially with how hard it is to find a PS5 at the moment, this is a terrible idea. Again, you have to be an idiot fanboy to do this. The Sony's operating system is garbage. Sony's programming and features are garbage. No one should support this. No one should do this. They should all just tell Sony to fuck off and do it themselves, like they're supposed to before they deliver a consumer product. But let's flip the script anyway for the moment, and we'll talk about Final Fantasy IX. And you may be wondering, Q, why are we talking about Final Fantasy IX? The game is 20-ish years old. I mean, sure, it's a good game and all that, but, well, we have something different. No, Final Fantasy IX is not getting a full-on Final Fantasy VII tier remake. But no. Final Fantasy IX is getting a new animated series. And this animated series is mainly going to be aimed at kids. So, for those of you out there who are expecting a faithful recreation of the story, probably not looking... this probably ain't it, dog. But this is going to be done by the Cyber Group Studios plus Square Enix, so it's going to be a collaboration between them. The Cyber Group will be producing the anime, they'll be doing all the worldwide distribution, all the worldwide licensing, and all the worldwide merch in relation to it. Production hasn't started yet. It is due to start either at the end of this year in late 2021 or in early 2022, depending on all how it goes, especially with coronavirus potentially winding up or down depending on where you live in the world. And yeah, these things just take time, so it's going to be a little bit interesting in a way to see what happens and how they do it. Final Fantasy IX is obviously a very good game, but it's aimed at kids, so I mean, what's the art style going to be like? What's the overall vibe of it going to be like? Is it just essentially going to be a big kids show? Or, I mean, it probably will be, but I don't know. I'll check out an episode or a trailer or something when it finally does come out in probably a few years from now. But I'm not getting my hopes up for it. I've nothing against it, but I'm just not getting my hopes up for it. Now, this next one is just a little bit of a bonus, if you will, because this one I find very, very strange. So the latest Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you know, the one that basically has nothing to do with Assassin's Creed, but people just want to play a game with Vikings because they're all tools. But yeah, you get the idea. Anywho, this one is very, very weird because I'm assuming the game is set in Norway. You know, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about the game other than it's a, you know, Vikings, and apparently they're like the least, they're just the complete opposite of assassins, but you know, whatever. I'm gonna slate the game and the series anyway because it's been trash since Assassin's Creed 2 Brotherhood. But anyway, let's get back to the point. So it's set somewhere in Scandinavia, I would imagine, because Vikings and whatnot. Now, the new DLC, I'm not sure if it's out yet or if it's the new upcoming one. It's very, very soon. Either way, it will have either just launched or it's coming very soon. I don't know. But this one is set in Ireland, and that's why I'm including it on here. It's literally just that reason. Well, it's not that reason. It's the reason we're about to talk about. The National Tourism Board of Ireland, the official, proper one, like the government branch that's designed to entice people to come to Ireland, you know, in usual terms and situations, forget coronavirus and pandemic and travel restrictions and all of that. But the official government of Ireland has teamed up with Ubisoft, and they are using this DLC to help promote tourism in Ireland. I suggest everyone goes out onto here on YouTube and just search for it. Just search for like Ireland tourism Assassin's Creed Valhalla or something like that, and you'll find a video. Now, the main reason for that is the new DLC is set in Ireland. Now, of course, it's probably set in like 700 AD or 300 AD. I don't know when, off the top of my head, when Vikings were the hotness. But I just find it very strange. I find it like almost meme-worthy. But let's look at it this way, right? Even though it will be set in Ireland, which is basically just a very green country, it will be like pretty much everything you're seeing here, just hopefully without all the bikes and cars and, you know, modern technology and all that around. But hey, it's just going to be very, very green. But speaking of green and stuff that is green, we're going to talk Xbox. Or specifically, we're going to talk Xbox branded monitors and TVs. Now, basically what you have to take into consideration for this next thing we're going to talk about here is modern display. I always say modern, especially modern audio, but that's a whole other story we're not going to talk about here. But modern display capabilities are very confusing for many console plebs out there, simply because they're used to just plugging something in and setting it to one thing and that's it. But now you have so many different things. You've got the likes of HDR, you've got 1080 60, you know, 1080 120, you've got 1440p at various frame rates, you've got 4K, you've got various frame rates, you've got different versions of HDMI, etc, etc, etc. And it gets all a little bit confusing because clearly if you're just gaming on a console, your level of intelligence is in the low double digits. But anyway, let's get back to it here. Microsoft have attempted to mitigate the absolute audio-video disaster that is modern gen. By the way, this is not limited to Xbox because the PS5 is an absolute disaster when it comes to audio and video. But let's get back to the point here. Microsoft have attempted to mitigate this by partnering with several different TV and monitor makers that are popular for console gaming, and they're partnering with them, and they're having like branded Xbox ones, you know, great for Xbox Series S. This is an Xbox monitor, an Xbox TV kind of thing like that, and it's just really to try and simplify it. Now, when you look back in the past, Microsoft, for example, during the 360 era, partnered with Samsung. Awful TVs, by the way. Never, ever. Well, I guess nowadays they're not as bad, but back then they were absolute trash tier for what they were. But people bought them because, at least here in Ireland and in this end of Europe, people are notoriously cheap, so they wanted the cheapest possible TV, and that would be a shitty Samsung, and the picture quality reflected it. Anyway, I'm a little bit salty over all of that because people need to demand better, so naturally they come to myself. Anyway, back to where I was. So now Microsoft has partnered with 3 different companies to offer these Xbox branded TVs and monitors, and mainly they'll be the TVs and monitors that will have feature sets that will complement and be in line with the Xbox Series consoles. So far, these brands are Philips, trash tier, do not ever buy any of their electronic products outside of maybe an electric razor. Acer, again, stay away from them completely. And Asus, which is one of the best brands in PC gaming and PC peripherals and accessories, which I highly, highly recommend. I use their products for like nearly 20 years at this point, and they've been absolutely fantastic. They have a reputation for a reason. Anyway, back to the point here. So mainly all this stuff, depending on the models you look at and whatnot, you're going to see some commonalities in here. You're going to see HDMI 2.1, you're going to see 4K 120 Hz in some of them, you're going to see HDR in some of them, etc, etc. Now, we do have a couple of models with some slight features and whatnot here too. First up is the Philips 55-inch. Now, this one is a TV. It is the Momentum 55 9M1RYV. That's the model number. And it's got a built-in soundbar, in which case, if you attempt to use that, I hate you, please die. But it's also got 4K 120 Hz. This is proper 4K 120 Hz. It's not like any of those shitty ones that are really 60 Hz and, you know, use all the interpolation and all this fake smooth motion and motion flow. No, it's none of that crap here. But it also has HDR. It didn't specify which level of it. It doesn't also specify if it is an OLED or if it's something else. So we have to be wary when it comes to that. So like I said, HDR is in there. It is HDMI 2.1, which is naturally important for a bunch of the other stuff in there too, with the likes of variable refresh rate and just 4K, well, HDR and 4K 120 FPS. And also it's got AMD FreeSync Pro. By the way, for those of you out there who are just getting into new TVs and whatnot, stay away from AMD FreeSync Pro because it's its own separate thing over the variable refresh rate included on HDMI 2.1. So essentially there is HDMI 2.1 VRR, which is the one built into that standard. And AMD FreeSync Pro will affect the output of your console, essentially. It will allow different things, usually less, because it's a different standard. If you just run off the HDMI 2.1 standard, you're perfectly fine. That's usually the way to go. Of course, all of this is kind of irrelevant if if consoles and proper TVs and all were smart and used DisplayPort, because it's vastly so much better than even HDMI 2.1. In fact, DisplayPort 1.4 has been out for a few years now. It's 80 gigabits per second. You know what HDMI 2.1, the brand new hotness is? 48 gigabits per second. Or in some of these console cases, 40, because they use a gimped version of it. 4 lanes at 10-bit HDR. Anyway, back to our point here. We also have the Asus Strix Xbox Edition monitor. Now, this is actually one of their already existing monitors that just recently launched, and they're relaunching it as an Xbox one as well. It's 4K, 120 Hz. We have no additional specs, and I believe it is a 43-inch monitor. So it's a decent size. It's a bit too much for a desk, if you ask me, but I mean, I'm looking at my TV right now, and it's a 55-inch OLED, so yeah. It is important to note the Asus Strix is a monitor, so it is likely some type of LED based one or some type of LCD based one. And last up we have the Acer Xbox Gaming Monitor 28-inch. Now this one unfortunately has no proper model number and has no specs whatsoever, but that is to be completely expected from Acer, and stay the fuck away from them. Anyway, all of this is kind of moot, if you will, because, I mean, like I said, audio and video is going to be very, very confusing for people, for console plebs this generation. It's already started getting very, very bad with the likes of, let's say, Sony and what they're not supporting, with Microsoft and what they are supporting. In fact, it's almost too much, but I mean, it's nice to have options, but it's going to start confusing people, as I'm sure if you've Google comment sections or looking anywhere on YouTube, you just see all these people confused by all this stuff they have no idea about, because it's no longer just plug in, pick 1080p, plug in, pick 4K, and you have all this other stuff, and it just blows their little pea-brain console pleb playing minds. Anyway, let's move on to something else that is absolutely plebbery as well. We have Marvel's Avengers. Now, of course, this one may or may not have been fixed by now already, but you've probably seen this out there too. Highlighting just how bad Marvel's Avengers is in basically everywhere. We're talking the PS4, PS5, Xbox, and PC game. That one, unfortunately. Just to highlight how bad it is in every single way. An update to the PS5 version of the game. It seems to only be the PS5 version. It doesn't seem to be any of the Xbox versions or the PC version. But it would display your IP publicly when you looked at your character name, and it would be constantly above your head just floating around. You would see your IP. Now, in and of itself, there's one thing I didn't confirm. If you're just playing with random people, can you see other people's one? It didn't seem like you could see other people's IPs above their head. But what was the big point of contention for this? And this one I partially disagree with, because you especially do not need to cater to these types of people. But, having said all that, before anyone gets mad, I do 100% believe that this should be fixed immediately because of principle and security alone. But, anyway, because it was showing your IP, this new patch hit the servers. I would hesitate to say thousands, because likely there's only about 7 people playing the game because it's so absolutely poor. But people went to stream the game. People wanted to see the new content of the new patches. They log into the game, they boot up their character, they load in, and suddenly, I hesitate to say the thousands of viewers, because they probably have like 10, because the game is shite and no one wants to see it. Then suddenly the streamer's IP is just right there, just straight up in your face, just right there on the screen. And of course that brings up all these other problems and all as well. Like I said, I don't know if this has been fixed or not. I haven't kept up with it since then, and I also haven't seen anything to say that it had been fixed. I just knew that they were working on it. But I do think it's a big oof in this case. And it's especially funny when you see how Square Enix handled it. They basically went out of their way to avoid saying it's your IP address, to give people proper warning. Like, think about it if you said this: please do not stream this game. Because of a bug, it will show your IP address beside your character name, or something along those lines, giving you a proper warning. Instead, all they said was, please do not stream the game. There is a bug that shows a floating string of text beside your name. Now, that could be anything. A random string of text, that could be anything. So, let's just assume I was playing that game. I could just think, it's just going to be a random stream of text. It's going to look pretty stupid. But I get to play the game all fine and all as well. And then I log in, and 10 out of the 12 people that would ever watch that game would be in my stream, and then boom, there's my IP address. Yeah, it's pretty scummy how they handle it too. But it just highlights the game is so fucked. But speaking of games that are or are not, or player bases and specific console users in this case that are fucked, we're going to talk Borderlands 3. Now, if you remember a little while back, there was all talk about crossplay finally coming to Borderlands 3, and that crossplay patch has finally gone live. And as detailed a few months ago, it is for almost everyone. Pretty much all the details confirmed back then are still the same now. So this new patch adds crossplay for PC users, Stadia users, lol I know, Mac users, extra lol I know, and Xbox players, slightly less lol but still lol in there. Now you may have noticed there's no crossplay for PlayStation in there, and this is because 2K decided not to pay Sony the increased price and increased cut and revenue share and royalties that Sony demands for any game that includes crossplay. So, Sony gamers get completely fucked over in this case by Sony's practices. Now you can argue that it's 2K's fault for not paying all of that, but no. I will say it's Sony's fault. You know why? Because Sony created that situation. Sony created the environment where it became an option to say no because of issues like this and money and revenue sharing and cuts and whatnot as well. So it sounds all too familiar, although usually it's Nintendo that have this problem. We're looking at the Switch physical media situation. That will come into play in another topic later. But you get the idea. This sounds all too familiar from whatever company it is. And, well, I have no sympathy. I have no sympathy. Well, actually, let me expand on that a little bit. I have sympathy for regular users who are left out in the cold by this. I have no sympathy for the fanboys, the ones that support Sony. Now, when I say support Sony, we're talking when they fanboy Sony. In fact, remember this way. The word fan, not even fanboy, the word fan is short for fanatic. When's the last time you heard a fanatic of something used in a good way? So, yeah, hopefully you get my point. Now, having said all that, it's time to talk about Konami. And if we're talking about Konami, you know what time it is. No. It is not another baseless Silent Hill rumor time, you absolute dank memers out there. But Konami have announced an official partnership with Bloober Team. That was very surprising for everyone, if you ask me. Although it had been hinted at and potentially leaked and rumored before. Now, you may be wondering who are Bloober Team. Well, Bloober Team are the creators of the Homage, including the composer Akira Yamamoto, The Medium. This game, of course, is pretty much a straight homage to Silent Hill. In fact, when the game was first revealed during one of the Xbox conferences, I want to say in 2020, I was actually convinced it was a new Silent Hill announcement because the game looked like Silent Hill. It had, obviously, Yamaoka's music, and that really hit as the Silent Hill, and I was convinced it was a new Silent Hill at the time. Anyway, let's pull it back. So, they have entered a new official agreement and partnership between Bloober Team and Konami. So now, boys and girls, children of all ages, and dank memers, it is now that time. Everyone reckons that this is to create a new Silent Hill game. But who knows at this point? With Konami, the home games market and all of that stuff, we can never be sure. We can never be sure. But let's look at it this way, okay? I'm gonna break it down for you real quick. The last couple of Silent Hill games we got, the proper ones at least anyway. I know there's the Vita one in there. I don't really count that. It was a Book of Shadows, Book of Memories, whatever it is. But Konami outsourced to a non-Japanese company. I think it was Climax. I could be wrong. And they made Homecoming. And Homecoming was trash. And then they made Downpour. Then they contracted out to another studio who made Downpour. And Downpour was so bad it pretty much killed the series. Although technically, did it really kill the series? The only potential worst thing for Silent Hills would have been if Kojima got his hands on it. Which he almost did with Silent Hills when PT came out. Or PT was teased or demoed or whatever it is. But you get the idea. And I'm just happy in a way. It's bittersweet because Bloober Team don't seem to make good games. But that remains to be seen. I recently installed Layers of Fear once I heard all this news, so I'm going to check it out. Anyway, it's bittersweet because Even though I would love a new good Silent Hill game, of course, good is the key important word in there, and I've pretty much resigned myself to the series being dead forever. It makes me happy that, as bad as Downpour was, it makes me happy that Kojima did not get his hands on it to make it even worse. Possibly the only person who could make a worse one, if we're basing it on PT. Or pretty much anything Kojima's done post MGS3. But for now, we have to wait and see. I don't know if the Medium turned out to be a good game. I hear it didn't. I don't know if it turned out to be a faithful recreation of a Silent Hill homage. Who knows? Maybe I'll pick it up eventually. But I'm just worried. I'm just worried. We have to wait and see. And yeah. But let's talk a little bit away from games and a little bit away from software and all. We're going to talk a little bit of hardware, coupled with a little bit of software, I guess. But we're going to specifically talk about Nvidia GPUs this time. So naturally, it's time to scare people with some news of discontinuation. I know people are already scrambling to eBay and their scalpers' preferred place just to try pick up a GPU, but it's not what you think. So the Nvidia GTX 600 and GTX 700 series cards, including my age-old, still in the other room, hasn't been turned on in literally years, GTX 690, will no longer be receiving supports and updates as of later this year. So starting October 4th is when it's officially only going to support new updates for Maxwell, Turing, and Ampere. That's starting October 4th, 2021. Now, the final game-ready driver that will include the 600 and 700 series GTX GPUs will arrive on August 31st, 2021. Now, I know some people are already going to bring up questions and whatnot about the likes of security features and all of that, and encryption and all types of stuff. Well, the cards themselves, everything in the 600 and 700 series of GTX cards, will get critical security updates until September of 2024. Some people are unhappy about the discontinuation of the support for optimizations and whatnot for the 600 and 700 series, and I'm not sure why at this point. We're right now, as we're sitting here at the start of July in 2021, depending on when you're seeing this, you know, these cards, the 600 and 700 series cards, are now 2 to 3 series below minimum of many current games. And with current gen consoles here now, games cutting out last gen consoles, last gen hardware equivalent to those consoles, they're all being cut out and phased out. Everything is moving on and moving forward. It's no surprise that with everything that I just listed, the fact that also these series, the 600 and 700 series, are 9 and 8 years old, respectively. And if you know anything about PC hardware, that's not just an eternity. That's about 4 eternities. So rest in peace, everything from the 600 series. Well, you know what? Everything from the 600 series sucks except for the 690. Rest in peace, everything from the 700 series, especially the 780 Ti, because people would meme with that card almost as much as they'd meme with a 980 Ti or a 970. You served us all well. You're gone. Or you will be. And you will not be forgotten. But now, because I don't have a proper transition into this next one, let's just jump straight into it, shall we? We're going to talk a little bit about PlayStation Studios. Now, you might remember PlayStation Studios is the new collective name for, well, all the PlayStation first-party studios. And it turns out they have bought up a new studio, or potentially new studios. But we'll get to that in a moment anyway. This is broken into 2 topics. So, first off, officially announced, I never know how to pronounce this one. It's like Housemarque, Housemarque. I always just call it Housemarque because, you know, I don't know why. They're the company that make Dead Nation. They've also more recently made Returnal for the PS5. So they have been bought by PlayStation Studios, and naturally there was the congratulation announcements, the tweets that were put out by the official PlayStation accounts, including the background with all the first-party studios and characters and whatnot, and they were like PlayStation Studios X, I almost forgot the name, Housemarque. But then unofficially, PlayStation Japan tweeted out a different picture in the same tweet by mistake. And this one was Bluepoint Games. So this one was quickly deleted and re-uploaded with the proper Housemarque one in there too. So we don't know what the deal is here when it comes to Sony potentially having bought Bluepoint Games. First off, I really, really hope it's not true. Bluepoint Games do fantastic work. They have done excellent work on non-PlayStation games. So many people are just idiot fanboys out there, and they will base it off one or two things that have happened in more recent memory. They are not a PlayStation exclusive support studio. They have done work on 360 games for Xbox. They have worked with Xbox before. And it would suck if this studio was gobbled up and then just had all this other potential that they could do just taken away and locked behind one specific brand for no reason. But the Sony fanboys will defend this because they're complete hypocrites. They will support Sony buying up all these individual studios, but they will bitch when Microsoft buys Bethesda or when Microsoft buys a studio. One of my favorite things to see over this topic, the potential leak that we had, and the next one we're going to talk about too, is where Sony fanboys have been coping with it. They've been moving goalposts and say, oh, at least it's only one studio, instead of like when Microsoft bought an entire publisher and got 9. And then over the course of like 2 or 3 days, it turns out that Sony have bought 3, potentially. They've definitely bought 2, maybe 3. And then you couple in Insomniac a few years ago and everything else they bought before that. Yeah, it's, you're just fucking hypocrites. But hell, I guess that's why you're fanboys at this time. But anyway, look at it this way. If they're going to be working on PS5 and PlayStation games, that stuff's going to come to PC anyway, where it's going to look and run best. So, big ups there. So, it would just be a shame if their stuff was limited to inferior PS5 hardware instead of real hardware where it can run free and look and play the best. But speaking of Sony, PC, and buying studios and whatnot here, well, this one is very, very interesting for me. Even more interesting than the potential Bluepoint Games thing. Because Sony have also acquired, I always call this Nixxes, just Nixxes software. Some people have called it Nixxes, because there's 2 X's. But let's just, for the purposes of this video, we'll call it Nixxes. Sony have acquired Nixxes software. It's a Dutch studio that primarily deals in PC ports of games. Now, this also, they have also worked on a couple of other ports, in a sense, like maybe they'd port a game from 360 to PS3 and PC, or they'd port a PS3 game to PC and 360, something like that. But the bulk of their work and the overall thing that the studio is known for is porting console games to PC. And to me, chances are this means one thing. This way, it would give them a proficient, PC-related, dedicated studio to handle and deal with all the upcoming PC ports of PlayStation games that have been announced by Jim Ryan. We've already seen Horizon Zero Dawn, which started off as a pretty poor port. It got better, but you get the idea. We've also seen Days Gone, which was a considerably better port. And we have even more coming soon, with the next one tipped to be Uncharted 4 based on what was leaked in that Sony investor meeting call thingy. And this makes perfect sense. They have a separate PC studio dedicated to working on these ports, one that is familiar with the PC development environment and all of that, while it leaves the main teams free of whatever studio to work on their proper next big upcoming games. So for example, let's just say Uncharted 4 is being ported to PC. Instead of someone in Naughty Dog doing that, they can go work on whatever it is, Uncharted 5 or The Last of Us Part 3 or whatever, while Nixxes ports that over. Now, it could be something else. It could be them just making them into a new studio to develop their own games and all as well. I find that highly unlikely, simply because Nixxes haven't developed a game themselves. Literally every game they've worked on has been a port game. So I can't imagine that one being the case. But speaking of PC stuff, we seem to have a new big important step forward when it comes to PC gaming, because Windows 11 has been announced. It has been detailed in many different ways, which we'll talk about here. But I do want to say one thing. First off, I just want to laugh Microsoft, remember when they said Windows 10 would be the last one and all the important updates and improvements and all would be just added to it over time? Yeah, that turned out to not be true. But I also want to point out something with Windows 11 as well. Now, we'll talk a bit more about it in what the features and benefits and the system requirements are a little bit down in this topic. But it seems, unlike all other versions of Windows, it seems like Windows 11 is considered more like a high-end optional upgrade. It includes all these extra features, usually pretty much everything that is highlighted in all of this and all of their announcement is about gaming, high-end gaming features, PC gaming and whatnot, and not just regular old consumer use, as in like regular old office kind of use or regular old just Joe Soap use. Anywho, let's get into some of the details we have so far. So we know that Windows 11 intends to release by the end of this year, here in 2021. The price currently is no price on the different versions of it and all, but it will have a free upgrade for existing Windows 10 licensed users. Good luck for me. I have 3 different computers, all with Windows 10. They're all officially licensed, so I get all my upgrades. Although having said that, one of them doesn't fit the minimum requirements, which we'll get to now in a minute. One of the big issues and the big worries that some people have is how the interface is going to change when it comes to upgrading to a new iteration of Windows. There's 2 major changes in this one. One of them is not really a major change, but I just meme it that way. It has a new rounded design. So essentially all your windows, all your tabs, all your everything, they're no longer going to have just sharp 90-degree angles. It's going to be like Windows Vista all over again with the rounded edges, or I guess Windows 7 as well, now that I think about it, it's been so long. And what is going to scare and confuse many people, but I think is kind of trying to go along with the whole Mac aesthetic, is now your start menu, all your taskbar and all of that will be centered in the middle of the screen. I can only imagine how many people are going to mod it day one to put everything back in the bottom left corner. It's going to have a completely redesigned Microsoft Store, and it's going to be better integrated and more natural to use and all. It's also going to have support for Android apps through that store as well. It's also important to note that developers can put their Android apps on the Windows 10 store to do all this, and they get to keep 100% of the profits. Microsoft take no revenue cut from Android apps, or in fact any apps sold on the Microsoft Store, from what I understand. There is one exception to this, and that is unless the game, or unless, I was going to say the game is a game, unless the app is a game. They have expressed that they want to have Steam and Epic available on there, but to me that screams like they could just get around it because Steam isn't a game. The games are sold through it, but it makes first off, if Microsoft said to Steam, we're gonna put you, or we want you on here, but even though you're not a game, every game you sell through it, if it's downloaded here, we take a cut from. Valve would just tell them to fuck off. Epic probably would too, to be honest. But hey, that's the beauty of Chrome. Just download it from the regular internet, just the old-fashioned way, and go from there. Anyway, it's also going to have better Xbox app integration, which is good in a way, because with how it's changed over the course of Windows 10, it's been pretty poor. The initial one in Windows 10 was pretty poor. I think they called it the Console Companion. And then they swapped it over to a whole different separate app. And it really showed that that wasn't the native base level integrated version. And it's just been awful to use. In fact, they even had a separate one just for the Game Pass stuff. And then they would do like Xbox Beta one, which is probably what's going to be involved and integrated into Windows 11. This next one is a decent upgrade and a decent feature with a decent addition. Is Auto HDR is going to be coming to Windows 11. So Auto HDR, if you're not sure, this is already taken into effect on the Xbox Series S consoles. If a game is not designed from the developers with HDR, Auto HDR is all this algorithm and everything and all this learning that the consoles or hardware uses, and it puts a lower level of HDR. Let's use for an example, we have HDR 10, which is 1000 nits. This Auto HDR, it might only give HDR 400, but it looks better than not having HDR at all. Of course, you will need a decent HDR display for this, but you get the idea. It's a nice additional benefit anyway, as long as it doesn't cause problems. They're also bringing direct storage finally to Windows 11. Now this is going to be a Windows 11 exclusive feature. They're not backporting it to Windows 10. And if you don't know what direct storage is, essentially, if you use an RTX 2000 series or 3000 series card, you're already essentially using Nvidia's version of that. But it is better to have it as a baseline integrated thing in Windows for direct storage. Essentially, it lets you skip the CPU essentially in game playing when it comes to checking if, say, textures need to be uncompressed, or if there's space, they can just uncompress them on the GPU, so it can just go straight to there. It's kind of similar with the meme that the new PS5 does, this, oh, it's got the I/O, we can just go straight to it and go from there. It's essentially that, but it's not even truly a real thing, but you get the idea. There'll be marginal gains and marginal benefits from it. Anyone with a high-end PC drive that you're already using will probably see an extra second or two shaved off your load times. I mean, put it this way. I've got a top-end CPU, I've got the best GPU you can get, I've got the best NVMe SSD you can get, and I expect to see practically minimal gains from it. Maybe 1 to 2 seconds. I mean, sure, I get it. I shouldn't even say 1 to 2 seconds, simply because that would be half my loading time as it is. But anyway, it's beside the point. It also includes things like pop-in and whatnot while you're playing, but that's back to the point. Anyway, Windows 11. There is a requirement for TPM 2.0, which, if I remember correctly, is the Trusted Protection Module 2.0. This may be a little bit confusing for some people because if your hardware already does have it or support it, you may need to enable it in the BIOS for your computer. It's usually only if you built a custom PC. A lot of the computers and laptops and stuff that have TPM 2.0, if you bought it as a pre-made, or if you bought a laptop from somewhere or something like that, it's probably already turned on. But this will become a bigger thing, closer, more informational thing, closer to the launch of it. There's already places out there telling you how to check it and how to enable it if needed. Everyone is kind of wondering, it's like, TPM 2.0, why do they need that? It's basically for security. That's essentially what it is. And it is usually only included in slightly newer hardware, but we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to the system requirements for Windows 11, which is actually right now we're going to talk about them. So it gets a little bit weird, right? Because the official requirements are listed for your processor as a 1 gigahertz or faster CPU with 2 or more cores on a compatible 64-bit processor or system on a chip. Now, this is weird because despite the low requirements of 1 gigahertz and 2 or more cores, this seems to be so low simply because it can do the single system on a chips. Like if you've got, we're just going to say Tegra X1. I know that's well out of date and there's like 5 more new upgrades to it, but system on a chips like that instead of just regular old CPUs, APUs, whatever it is. Because despite those low requirements for CPUs and whatnot, it seems to only be compatible with Intel 8th generation chips or newer and Ryzen 2nd generation chips or newer. Again, this could all be down to TPM 2.0 because of the hardware and the motherboards and all typically included with them, but it's just not directly comparable in that way. Anyway, other system requirements, we have the RAM requirement of 4 gigabytes. There's no specific if it's like I was going to say if it's DDR1, but you get the idea. Chances are if you're using these type of chips, it's going to be DDR4. I'm not sure if some of the lower end ones on there include DDR3, but you get the idea. The storage requirement is 64 gigabytes or larger on your specific storage device. System firmware, like we mentioned above, is going to be the Trusted Platform, so not Trusted Protection, Trusted Platform module version 2.0. Graphics card will be compatible with DirectX 12 or later with WDDM 2.0 driver. It's also going to have S mode is only supported on the home edition of Windows 11. If you're running a different edition of Windows in S mode, you will need to first switch out of S mode prior to upgrading. So like I said, it does seem that it's going to be a much higher spec, higher minimum requirement and feature-laden version of Windows. All of these features seem to be targeted towards gamers rather than regular use, which to me it makes perfect sense that they would have the requirements so high, because it seems like it's more of a premium version of Windows rather than just the regular Joe Soap user version of Windows. And it really feels like it's going to be the kind of gamer boutique feature, if you will. Personally, I plan on upgrading to Windows 11 at some point next year when the upgrades and all start. Because even though Windows 11 is going to launch by the end of 2021, the free upgrades won't start until 2022. But of course, as every new iteration of Windows, I personally always wait at least a year, simply because then you get two major, I guess they don't call them service packs anymore, but they get two major upgrades, two major fixes and whatnot to, well, we all know the issues that early operating systems and all can have. But anyway, we're going to hit up our last topic this week, and it's going to be a little bit of a different one. I did mention earlier we were going to talk about one of the issues where companies create a garbage situation around a garbage system kind of thing. And now we're looking at Monster Hunter Stories 2, because it's time for a little bit of confusing messaging. So with this one, it's a bit messy, so we're not sure on if it's back or forward, which side it is. So let me explain. On the back of the physical edition of Monster Hunter Stories 2 on Nintendo Switch, remember the game's also coming to PC on the same day, but on the back of the physical edition, it lists game download of at least 15 gigabyte. So that's a bit much for a physical game, if you will, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, could it mean that this supposed physical edition is only a code in a box? Personally, I'd say that's not the case, and it's probably highly unlikely, but it's especially weird when you consider the eShop listing for the digital download version of the game is only 13.5 gigabytes. So it's not even 15 gigabytes. It's not an additional 15 gigabytes, or is it? It's strange, because why would you have a physical edition of a game and also require a bigger download than is included in the digital release? So it's a bit strange and it's a bit mixed. It is important to note as well that the PC version is 28 gigabyte, which is pretty much the two of these sizes combined. But of course the PC version is going to include higher quality everything in every way, because it will be the best version of the game. So it makes sense that the extremely gimped, cut down, crappy piece of shit Switch version is considerably smaller, to go with the trash tier quality that comes with it. But anywho, back to what I was saying. Since the Switch is basically a trash platform because Nintendo designed it extremely poorly, and it has the worst kind of physical media, which costs more for publishers to make and publishers to, well, I guess you shouldn't make because Nintendo make them. It costs more from publishers to buy/license, so many of them don't even publish physical games fully in specific regions. In fact, it leads to digital-only releases, or in some cases, they will opt for a very small game card because it will be cheaper, and then they will force game downloads from the servers, considering that the actual game on the card is incomplete and will eventually be rendered moot and useless when the servers are shut down and you can no longer download the other 75% of your game. So it looks like in this case, Monster Hunter Stories 2 could be the latest victim. But anywho, that is it for our 87th episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast. I know many people were clamoring and wondering about the Q, what's going on, what's up, what's going down, what are you playing segment. Well, frankly, I've left this out of here just because. Anywho, I keep saying anywho for some reason today. I don't know why I picked that one up. So, let me know, as always, in the comment section below. Questions, opinions, praise, salt, butthurt, whatever it is. That's what it's all down there for. As always, I want to thank everyone for watching. We will be back with less frequent, less regular videos and podcast episodes over the next couple of weeks, but we'll get it all pulled back together. And you know what? It's gonna feel so good to say this. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and remember, winners don't play switch ports.